been recommended as penny-wise and pound-foolish, and a great American institution that serves many rural people and others without a lot of connectivity and fortune will suffer. And I wish the Postmaster General will reconsider his action. I have a dear colleague being circulated and hope people will sign on and will save the U.S. Postal Office. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Are there any further one-minute requests? Okay. The Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Marino of Pennsylvania for today and Mr. Young of Florida for today and for Wednesday, December 7th.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's an awful lot of people hurting across America now. We take up a few suspension bills here that only the Congress could deal with, so it's something we have to do. We're proud to do. Important to those organizations and to states. It's important to them. It's important to us. We have people on the other side of the aisle who come forward and try to make it into a jobs debate when it would seem that some of the best debate would be if all of us en masse walked down to the other end of the hall of this building and began to seek to debate the Senate leadership, that is, and the Democratic Party, on why they are so intent on stopping legislation that could put people back to work. There are many besides the President, in addition to the President, who say this is a do-nothing Congress. And because the Senate does so very little, they give credence to that argument. One need only look to all the bills we've been passing here in the House that could help the economy, would help the economy, would put people back to work, would bring down dramatically the cost of energy, which would bring down inflation and the stagnation and stagflation that's been put in place by this President and the actually the 2 years prior to this President, when our Democratic friends across the aisle controlled Congress and jumped up spending like we could not have anticipated. Our friends across the aisle correctly pointed out that Republicans in 2006 were spending too much money. They were right in pointing out that we should never be spending $160 billion more than we were taking in. They were right. And as a result of their being right on that and their promises that they would rein in that runaway spending, our friends across the aisle were given the majority in November of 2006. What followed in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, under the Democratic majority, was runaway spending at a level never even dreamed of, at least on our side of the aisle. Who would have ever dreamed that the same party that condemned Republicans correctly for overspending the amount of money coming into the federal treasury by $160 billion would up that ante and overspend by 10 times that much. Over $1.5 trillion deficit in 1 year. It is just unfathomable. One of the things that so concerned me about TARP, not only the bill when I read it, but the fact that it desensitized Americans to just how much $700 billion is and how much it was in late 2008. It's my belief that if we had not passed TARP and people be so desensitized to how much $700 billion was, then President Obama could never have gotten through what was said to be around an $800 billion porculus, stimulus, whatever you wish to call it, which turned out, some accounts, maybe more like $1 trillion giveaway program. Only if you consider giving away amounts like $500 to $600 million to Solyndra that goes bankrupt as throwing away money. We have set this country on a course toward ruin. And now the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Geithner, who we recall had time with the International Monetary Fund, as came to light during his unfortunate confirmation hearings. 4 years in a row, he was paid by the International Monetary Fund and was said to be an independent contractor, though he manifested control and some level of governance within the International Monetary Fund. He had a job with the International Monetary Fund, but they paid him as an independent contractor, and therefore when he signed a document swearing that he would pay all of the taxes due on those documents that were listed on those 4 documents, then he was allowed to receive all of the money that should have been paid to the federal government in taxes in return for his sworn agreement to pay that tax independently on his own. As we found out during those confirmation hearings, he did not fulfill his oath, he broke his oath, he didn't pay those taxes, and now he's in charge of the Treasury. How amazing. I've privately had Internal Revenue Service employees tell me how grieved they were to have had someone who did not pay his taxes when he was required to do so by law, went even further, and he signed a sworn document that he would take care of it and didn't. Because despite all the jokes about the IRS, and despite there being some people with the IRS who can be a bit brutal at times, there are some wonderful people that work for the Internal Revenue Service who are abundantly fair, want to do the right thing, and have incredibly clean backgrounds. And in fact, the rule, as I was given to understand by IRS employees, is if you ever have underpaid your taxes or failed to pay taxes, you're out. You cannot work for the IRS. There have been incidences where an IRS agent has overpaid taxes and then recall someone giving them cash, and without anyone ever being able to hold them accountable, no one would have ever reported it, but to keep a clean conscience because an IRS agent was so clean and had a conscience and wanted so to abide by honesty and truth and the U.S. law, filed an amended tax return, which still allowed a refund coming back, and as a result, their employment was in jeopardy. Imagine the feeling of Internal Revenue Service employees who have had to, throughout their stellar careers at the Internal Revenue Service, had to keep all of their affairs clean, in order, open, honest, to find out they are going to be ruled and governed by someone who misrepresented on signing a sworn document that they would pay taxes that they didn't until someone called it to their attention in approach to being appointed to that role. It's got to be tough for IRS agents who have had such honorable, stellar careers to have dealt with that. So what's wrong with having somebody who plays so fast and loose with signing documents, not paying taxes, playing with other people's money in the International Monetary Fund? I would submit to you that we get things as we have here recently with our Secretary of the Treasury, who enjoyed spending hundreds of billions of dollars from TARP, who's enjoyed the power of giving away money, paying money. Under TARP, in fact, provision allows Secretary of Treasury to even pay more than fair market value. If anything, and this is my interpretation, anything in his opinion, sole opinion, would somehow, some way, someday help our economy somehow, even if it was helping a foreign economy. That's the mentality at the IMF, and apparently the mentality currently at the Treasury Department. I did not think we could get a worse Treasury Secretary than Hank Paulson until we got our current Treasury Secretary making the mistakes he has and taking the positions he has, and now wanting Americans to come in and bail out foreign countries who are slightly ahead of us on the road to socialism. You go back to the Roman Empire, the Romans found that over time, when you continue to give people bread and circuses, they come to rely on those. They come to believe that they shouldn't have to work, that the government will give them entertainment and will give them money to use, food that they need, and it materially affects work. Socialism of a sort was tried in the New Testament church, and on this earth, this planet, with fallible individuals, it resulted, as it always has and always will, in the Apostle Paul ultimately having to come to the conclusion and issue the order, okay, new rule, if you don't work, you don't eat. The Pilgrims had a beautiful compact. They were going to bring together all into a common storehouse and share alike. A brutal first winter caused them to lose so many. Eventually they got to a new thing that we now call private property, where people would own their own property, produce from it as they wished, with full freedom to do so. They could eat what they raised, they could trade what they raised, they could use it as they saw fit. That kind of mentality and that kind of structure that affords private property to people to own and use on their own, or rental property that they can use to produce income. Those kind of freedoms have allowed the entrepreneurism that has brought us to the point in history where we are the greatest nation in the history of mankind, with more freedoms than any history in mankind, in the history of mankind. But over time, we've seen, as those who fled Europe and England to come to America to start a new life, so many of them fleeing persecution as Christians, coming to a new land where they would not be persecuted as Christians. They came to America. And with private property engendering the kind of thought processes that led our founders through the guidance, divinely, I believe, that they got, as pointed to by so many of the founders, we got our Constitution. We have a structure of government from founders who did not trust government, who wanted to make it as difficult as possible to pass laws. And even once they were passed, that they could be vetoed, struck down. They wanted it difficult. They saw gridlock as being a good thing. The more difficult it was to pass laws, the less chance the government would interfere in personal property rights and personal freedoms of the individual. Europe, after World War II, seemed to move into this socialist type of thinking where the government will take care of people. Some in this country after World War II, for 60 years, going on 70 years now, have been pushing an agenda to get us to a socialist state where we take on the attributes of those systems that have repeatedly failed over and over in time. I was recently in Israel, went to a former kibbutz. Those were truly communes. They had real communism there, share and share alike. But socialism, communism, it can sound so nice. Everyone bring in to the common storehouse, share and share alike. It sounds nice, but it never works. And I saw that so clearly in an exchange program to the Soviet Union back in 1973, when it really was the Soviet Union. And on visiting a collective farm, a socialist farm, you look out, the fields did not look very good. I worked on farms and ranches, and those did not look productive. But I was surprised to see in the middle of the morning, the farmers were sitting in the shade in the center of the village. And I spoke some Russian back then and asked as nicely as I could without meaning to insult, because I really was curious, when do you work out in the fields? And they laughed. And one of them, that seemed to be the most boisterous for the group, said, I make the same number of rubles if I'm out there or I'm here in the shade, so I'm here in the shade. That's socialism. That's why it fails. And we've seen the riots in Greece as the government tried to be responsible and say, look, we're going broke. We're out of business. We have got to stop spending money we don't have. We've got to rein it in. And people have rioted and say, no, 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 don't cut back what I'm getting from the government, not understanding if it's not there, your government will eventually be taken over by some type of radical form. At least historically, that's what often happens. And some dictator, which they would hope would be a benevolent dictator, would take over, get the rioting under control, and set the government on a course. We saw a government after World War I in Germany trying to work toward a democratic process. Economic times were tough, and so a little guy with a mustache ends up actually getting elected to office and then eventually taking over the country. And we know the results of that. At least most of us do. There's some, like Ahmadinejad, that think the Holocaust never happened, but it did. So, why in the world, when we see how that works out, and we see that a country will not accept its own responsibility, as incredible as the people can be of a country like Greece, you meet people from Greece, you love them. They're just great folks. As beautiful as a country can be, as rich a history as a country can have like Greece, you want to embrace them. Understandable. But when a people such as those in Greece want to continue down a bankrupt course, and you see them heading for the edge of a cliff, and they say, come join hands with us, it doesn't make me feel any better to hear people like Secretary Geithner say, let's, figuratively speaking, join hands as they jump off the cliff and take us with them. But we're told, well, gee, some of the European countries, that if they'll feel better about trying to bail out Greece if they know that the United States will come in and if things don't work out, and bail them out. I mean, we have had such radicalized spending that's been out of control. And until we get that under control, we're of very little use to much of the world economically. The best thing we could do for Greece, for all of Europe, is get our spending under control, come back from a point of strength financially, show them by example how you get out of your problems, and then the world will be better off financially. Because you see repeatedly in history, when a country gets in trouble financially, it opens the door to dictators or a radical form of a government, such as we see in Iran today. That wasn't entirely economic. We do recall, I was in the Army at the time, when President Carter failed to support our ally, the Shah, apparently, never met the man, but apparently historically, not a warm, fuzzy fellow, was not fine with the folks in Iran. But using very poor judgment, President Carter hailed the Ayatollah Khomeini in his return to Iran as a man of peace. And as a result of that man of peace, as President Carter hailed him, thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans have given their lives or had their lives taken from them. There are prices that are paid by bad judgment, and this country has paid a price for bad judgment, and now we have more efforts at bad judgment, and that would include telling the world that as we've overspent more than $1 trillion more than what we have coming in, don't worry, we'll come bail you out. I was surprised to find out this summer that we're not printing money to get us out of our problem. No, we're not printing money. I was surprised to find out, because I've said that before, I think we're just printing money to try to pay off our debt. That caused runaway inflation. Well, I was corrected, and I stand corrected. We're not printing money to get out of our financial dilemma. No, I was told we're not printing this money. We're just adding zeros, ones and zeros, in a computer to say that we've got more money. Now, we're not even printing it anymore. How irresponsible is that? There is a price that will be paid for that kind of irresponsibility, and it is very tragic that it may well be paid by our children and grandchildren, the height of irresponsibility to leave that to future generations. And then to have our Treasury Secretary say, let's go bail these folks out. Well, it's not really us. It's the International Monetary Fund. Kind of reminiscent of President Obama saying, we're going to go get Gaddafi, we're going to help these so-called rebels, but we're not actually going to do it. No, we're not going to do it. NATO will do it. We started out for a little bit there, but now it's not the United States at all, it's NATO. So we check. We find out 65% of NATO's military is United States Armed Services. Oh, no, it wasn't NATO much. 65% was the United States. It was the United States. And now this Secretary of the Treasury wants us to do this with countries that are failing and yet still unwilling to embrace the problem they've created. And then we're told there's such great news that unemployment has now dropped from 9.1% to 8.6%, or 9.0 to 8.6%. And we're supposed to feel like that is such a wonderful thing. I'm not a huge fan of the New York Times, but there is an article in December 2nd's New York Times, an editorial, entitled, "Been Down So Long." And I think it's worth entering into the congressional record by its reading. The unemployment rate dropped to 8.6% in November from 9% in October in the jobs report released Friday. The economy added 120,000 jobs, and job growth was revised upward in September and October. That's better than rising unemployment and falling payrolls, yet, properly understood, the new figures reveal more about the depth of distress of the job market than about real improvement in the job prospects. Most of the decline in November's unemployment rate was not because jobless people found new work. Rather, it is because 315,000 people dropped out of the workforce, a reflection of extraordinarily weak demand by employers for new workers. It is also a sign of socioeconomic decline, of wasted resources, and untapped potential, the human equivalent of boarded up main streets and shuttered factories. The job growth numbers also came with caveats. More jobs were created than economists expected, but with the job market so weak for so long, that is a low bar. It would take nearly 11 million new jobs to replace the ones that were lost during the recession and to keep up with the growth in the working age population in the last 4 years. To fill that gap would require 275,000 new jobs a month for the next 5 years. That's not in the cards. Even with the better-than-expected job growth in the past 3 months, the economy added only 143,000 jobs on average. And most of those new jobs are low-end jobs. In November, for example, big job growth areas included retail sales, bartending, and temporary services. Teachers and other public employees continue to lose jobs, and job growth in construction and manufacturing were basically flat. Indeed, work, once the pathway to a rising standard of living, has become for many a route toward downward mobility. Motoko Rich reported in the Times recently on new research showing that most people who lost their jobs in recent years now make less and have not maintained their lifestyles, with many experiencing what they describe as drastic and probably irreversible declines in income. Against that backdrop, the modest improvement in the jobs report, even if sustained in the months to come, would not be enough to repair the damage from the recession and its slow growth aftermath. The New York Times goes on, help is needed. Yet Congress is tied in knots over even basic recovery measures like extending federal unemployment benefits and the temporary payroll tax cut. Meanwhile, the increasing likelihood of a recession in Europe or any other setback could easily derail the weak American economy, sending unemployment back up to double-digit recession levels. Now, we've been hearing a great deal lately from the President and from members of Congress on the Democratic side about how we just needed to extend this wonderful payroll tax holiday. Well, as the person who came up with the idea of a payroll tax holiday 3 years ago, I'm offended at the use of the term payroll tax holiday to cut 6.2% Social Security tax down to 4.2% Social Security tax when it has not increased jobs, it has not helped jobs. We're talking $30, $40, $50, $60 when the payroll tax holiday I was proposing was a true holiday. It would have allowed every worker in America not to pay any Social Security tax, any Medicare tax, any income tax for at least 2 months, And it would not have hurt Social Security, the trust fund, and it would not have hurt the Medicare system because it was totally paid for. My bill said that money that was left over, which was available at the time before our Secretary of Treasury just started giving it away, that money would be moved over and would cover the Social Security trust fund monies that were necessary, so the tax would not be missed. It would cover the monies that was supposed to go in to cover Medicare. And so the only way that money would be missed is that Secretary Geithner would not have been able to give it away and support those 4-to-1 Democrats or Republicans that are executives on Wall Street and who reside in controlling our investment banks. And that's a shock to some people when they actually do their research and find out Wall Street is 4-to-1 Democrat over Republican, because they've been listening to Democratic leaders for years talk about those sorry fat cat Republicans on Wall Street. Well, they hadn't done their research either. Or if they had, they would have been very disingenuous in so saying. That money, as I and many others contended, that was in TARP and was in the slush fund of the Secretary of the Treasury would have been far better used by those people who earned it. By just saying you get every dime back that you were paying in this month and next month. And I also knew privately in my heart that if we could have that payroll tax holiday, a true payroll tax holiday for 2 months, and initially I said a year, but if we could have that for even 2 months, then I knew taxpayers across the country would see, most for the first time, just how much money they were sending for the federal government to use, and they would demand better from their Congress, from their president. They would demand better from the bureaucrats in Washington that get to the end of the year and see they've got money left and rush out and throw it away, spend it on whatever they can. They would have demanded better government, and they would have gotten it, or they would have fired everybody at the next election and gotten better. But we didn't get a true payroll tax holiday, and I was very honored to have a chance to explain the concept of a payroll tax holiday when President Obama came to our Republican conference back the first of the year in 2009. And as I explained to him, this is immediate. It immediately helps the economy. Moody said the tax holiday idea, a true tax holiday, not this bastardization of one, the true tax holiday would have increased the one-year GDP more than any other proposal, more than any other Democratic proposal or any other Republican proposal. And as I explained to the President, we pass this and you sign it, and if you just say you were willing to sign it, we would get it passed. And the day you sign it on a Thursday, then on Friday, all of that money, all of the income tax, Social Security, Medicare tax, all of that will be in the check of the person that owned it. It doesn't have to go through Washington and Washington take its cut out and dribble out $30, $40, $50, $60 to the worker. They got it all. And then to know that was going to be paid for by stopping the giveaways to the auto companies, to the investment banks, to the fat cats, as the President calls them, that was what I wanted to see. And that money would go into the hands of the people that earned it, and then they would have decided. We did a survey in our district about what people would use their money for. Look at your check. Think about it for 2 months. What would you use it for? And we weren't talking about $20, $30, $40, $50, $60 like this president has. We were talking about $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $6,000. And when people did that, they told us, for example, we've got a gas guzzler, and gas is so high now, we can barely pay our gasoline bill, but we're underwater on our car. We owe more than the car is worth, so we can't afford to trade it in, so we're stuck. You let us have our money for 2 months, we'll buy a new car. And the people in America would have decided which car companies deserve to be bailed out, and they would do that by deciding which car they would buy. And you wouldn't have had to have an auto task force secretively meeting in the White House and an auto czar and all those folks breaching the Constitution, breaching bankruptcy law, and deciding which dealers got to keep their dealership and which would have them arbitrarily yanked away, only years down the road to find out, whoops, we made a mistake on that. Oh, well, they're gone. Too bad. We could have avoided all of that. And with all the effort that was undertaken to try to shore up the real estate market, we had people telling us, look, we got behind on our mortgage payments when gas hit $4 an hour. You let us have the $6,000 we get to keep over 2 months. We'll catch up on our mortgage. We'll catch up on the other things. You don't need to have some big financial bailout situation because we'll take care of it ourselves. We have our own money. And then again, to know that that would have been paid for by the TARP money and Social Security would not have been hurt. They would have gotten all the tax money that would have come in. It just come from TARP instead of the individual taxpayers. And to know that Medicare would not have been hurt because that money would have gone directly into Medicare, not from the taxpayer for 2 months, but from TARP. That would have been the right thing to do if you really want a stimulus. Let the people that earned it spend it. They'll know better than the people here in Washington did. And it didn't pass. And President Obama has chosen to take the name payroll tax holiday that I was using 3 years ago and use it for a 2% tax. Why? Because it will look good for the election. Why? Because it looks to be so grand because, see, you can tell people that are working that, gee, the president's got you a petty $30 extra in your check, and these Republicans don't want you to keep that. That's not true. We do. But we also, at the same time, don't want Social Security not to have the money that it needs. What the President is not telling people, as he has pitted those who are working now against our seniors, and to the one group saying, hey, workers, I want you to have that little extra $30 in your paycheck, and Republicans don't want you to have it. And then going to seniors and say, you got to worry about those Republicans because they're not going to take care of Social Security. Never bothering to mention that when he says, we're allowing you to keep this money in your check now, it means that money will not be in the Social Security Trust Fund. Not even the IOU will be in the Social Security Trust Fund to take care of our seniors. We were told when this president was running that he was a uniter, not a divider. And yet we see in this campaign ploy that working people are being pitted against our seniors. We've seen class warfare. In essence, if you see somebody has more than you do, you need to want it and go after it. After all, that basically seems to be the one common thread running through all the Occupy Wall Street, Washington, all the Occupy groups. We had them come through Washington screaming in the hallways today. Wasn't enough that they're trying to disrupt a beautiful park people used to enjoy. And why? Because they have no regard for private property. Why? Because they become envious and jealous. And I can say that because I'm repeatedly told in the analysis that I have less assets than most people. One time I had the least assets of anybody in from Texas in Congress. My wife and I cashed out all our assets except our house so I could run for Congress, so I could try to make a difference. And I am not jealous of anyone who has more than me. I thank God we have a country where people can be entrepreneurs, and I've accepted that as a role I can play in helping try to do that. So it breaks my heart when I see a president dividing America on class warfare, encouraging envy and jealousy. You ought to want what they have and demand that you get theirs. Coming out, leaders coming out and saying they fully embrace the Occupy movement. It's a great thing when even the Occupy folks can't explain anything other than they hate the people that got more than they do. Then there's a report. I don't often cite CNBC, but CNBC.com, more Americans are going abroad for economic opportunities. It says the State Department now estimates that 6.3 million Americans are studying or working abroad, the highest number on record. We're told that 70% of Americans, adults, believe that their children will not have as much opportunity and freedom as they've had. That's why I ran for Congress. That should not happen. We can change that. But I'm mystified when I think about the record spending in 2007 that was followed by additional record spending in 2008 under the guidance of Speaker Pelosi and Leader Reid, because we know all spending originates in Congress. This is where budgets are passed. It's where appropriations are passed. If money is appropriated, it has to be appropriated from here. 2007, 2008, I never heard anybody, Democrat or Republican, complain that those budgets didn't spend enough money each year going beyond what we had spent the year before. And so then to have a new president come in 2009, and with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Reid still at the reins, jump up spending an extra $1 trillion, and then come before Congress and the country and say, look, you're just going to have to raise taxes to get up to where this extra $1 trillion is that I've already spent. Why couldn't we just say, you know what, nobody complained in 07 or 08 about too little money being spent. Let's go back to the Pelosi-Reid budget that was so much more than the Republican budgets of 05 and 06. We'll go back to those. It means we drop $1 trillion in spending. Boom, there you go. We didn't need a super committee. There you are. And another easy solution that isn't talked about enough, but this House voted to cut our own legislative budgets 5% last year and 6.4% the year we're in. That amount of money, though significant to most of us, is a drop in the bucket when you look at the overall federal budget, and the way that that should be used to make a difference is for this House, since we've done it to ourselves, now having the moral authority to say to every federal department, every agency, we cut ourselves 5% last year, you're cutting yourself 5% next year. And the year after that, since we've already done it, you're cutting yourself another 6.4%, 11% cuts, and there you are. We didn't need a super committee. You've got your cuts. I am so grateful to Chairman Paul Ryan. We had a good discussion back in July, and I was so thrilled to hear that he has believed, since he's been in Congress like I have, the 4 terms I've been in Congress, each time I've filed a zero baseline budget bill that says no more automatic increases for every department. No automatic increases. It ought to be an easy concept. But we're living under the rules that were established for CBO back in 1974, a very, very liberal Congress that ended our participation in Southeast Asia. We should have ended it because we had not given our soldiers, sailors, airmen, we had not given them the go-ahead to win that war. We had tied their hands. When I hear some people say, we ought to remember the lesson of Vietnam, and then they turn out they didn't get the lesson. The lesson is that unless you're willing to commit 100% of the resources and give the rules of engagement that allow our military to win, they should never be sent. It is outrageous to have our military in foreign countries with rules of engagement that don't allow them to adequately protect themselves. That's the lesson that should have been learned from Vietnam. We could have won the war. Sam Johnson can tell you the leaders in Hanoi as the POWs were taken out. One was laughing, you stupid Americans, if you just bombed us one more week like the 2 weeks they'd had before, we'd had to surrender unconditionally. Could have done that years before. Saved thousands and thousands of American lives in Vietnam, but we didn't commit to win it. We shouldn't send anybody anywhere unless we're committed to win. It costs too much money. But even more than that, it costs the greatest American treasure, and that's American lives. We are in an economic crisis. And as Peter Marshall, as chaplain of the U.S. Senate, prayed in the 1940s, what we call crises, God sees as opportunities. It turns out those of us in the House, those of us in the Senate, even the President, have an incredible opportunity. We'll never be called the greatest generation. But 100 years from now, if we bring spending down under control, people can look back and say, wow, they had about 60 years, 65 years, uncontrolled spending. It grew and grew and grew. And the people that were in government then did something that most have never been able to do when they get to that point, when nearly 50% are getting more back than they're paying in. They were able to restrain their spending, get control of their financial destiny, and we got another 200 years of the greatest nation in history. The other is possible. They look back and say, wow, the United States followed the tried and true path to the dustbin of history. They spent more than they had. People found that they could get Congress to vote them money out of the Treasury. And once again, that socialized concept, the socialist concept failed, and the nation failed. And the nation that provided for that brief time of Camelot, a time of hope, relative peace, evolving toward more perfect freedom, was lost because of financial irresponsibility. People have heard me so many times quote Ben Franklin. But it's easy to see from Proverbs, it's easy to see from speeches of people like Ben Franklin. Our problem is a selfish problem. Anytime we spend more money than we have with complete and utter disregard, gross negligent disregard, even intentional disregard for the future of our children, and one day their children, and one day their children, complete disregard, we want to spend it on ourselves now. It's time to tell Greece, to tell everyone, let's hold hands and do this together. Not jump over the cliff by spending good money after bad. Let's do it by not spending money we don't have. And there's no way a country would not be upgraded when S&P and the world see these people are really serious about not spending more than they have coming in. This is a brave country. They know how to make commitments. And that would get us back to having true freedom and not having the American citizens have to come begging to Congress. Please, please throw us more morsels. Instead, Congress would be a body that inspired greatness and inspired potential again, and wouldn't lure young women into the rut of having children out of wedlock because they're bored with high school. It would instead give them incentives and encouragement. Reach your potential. Finish high school. Go to college. Let's have incentives not to stay out of work. Let's have incentives to get back to work. Let's have incentives to sell our products around the world. You do that by decreasing the tariff that we put on American-made goods by every American company. That would help get us on the road back to financial independence. And one other thing, when you have been blessed as the greatest country in the world when it comes to having your own energy, we ought to use it. We have it. We've been blessed with it. It's time to use it. And I would humbly suggest that this president get out of the way, stop preventing our use of our own energy, and allow us to become an independent and great nation again. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on December 6, 2011 at 2:04 p.m. that the Senate passed Senate 384. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Madam Speaker.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Capter, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
I thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'm very pleased to join my colleagues, including Congressman John Garamendi of California this evening, to talk a little bit about the standoff that appears to be happening in discussions between the Senate and the House, and the seemingly irresolvable issue of whether or not average American families are going to be able to maintain a tax benefit on their payroll tax deduction relating to Social Security contributions for the average family. This is about $1,000 a year. Whether they'll be able to maintain that tax benefit, or whether or not that money is going to be taken away from them and tax breaks given to multimillionaires and billionaires in our country. It appears that the Republican Party is quite adverse to having everybody in this country pay their fair share. And I just want to go on record as saying that at this point in our economic recovery, nothing could be more important than keeping that tax benefit in the hands and pockets of America's families. They're the ones that actually take those dollars every month and they buy essentials, not extravagant purchases. They make their car payment if they're fortunate enough to have a car. They buy enough food for their family. They buy clothing. And my golly, during the holiday season, they might even be able to buy a little bit extra, something special for their holiday dinners, and pay down some of the debt that their kids have in trying to pay their college or after high school training bills. And it's really amazing to me that in the richest and most powerful country in the world, that we continue to have this tremendous friction here in the Congress to do something that is so reasonable, that is just so eminently reasonable, and would contribute to economic growth. We know that consumer spending is the most powerful instrument to help lift this economy out of its doldrums. As we see the automotive industry recover, and we got more signs of that today in Ohio with a wonderful announcement by Ford that it is moving its truck line from Mexico back up to Avon Lake, Ohio, and making over $128 million investment there. As we see this industry that the Obama administration and certain members of this Congress worked so hard to fight for the recovery of that industry, we see car sales increasing. That's because people have spendable income. So why would you want to, at this point in our history, allow those who have the most not to pay their fair share and to take away $1,000 a year on average from middle-class families who would spend those dollars in helping to propel economic growth? I can guarantee you that at firms that I represent, like Chrysler Jeep, Fiat, that the Wrangler, that the Cherokee, that the Liberty are selling very well, that General Motors Cruise vehicle, which is largely a Northern Ohio-made car, is selling like hotcakes because people are able to make those monthly payments. So that particular part of the discussion here in Washington makes such eminent sense. Why in the world would you want to penalize middle-class families because you want to just take care of the top 1%? It simply isn't fair. It simply isn't fair. And it would seem to me that in the holiday spirit that both chambers should get together, the tax writing committees, and figure out a solution that is fair to all families. It's pretty clear to me what that is. And it's pretty clear to me that with corporate profits at all-time highs, and those who run these corporations and sit on their boards, they have been doing quite well, thank you. And it's time for them to do something for the Republic. It's not that big a deal. Who's going to miss an 8th home or a 7th yacht? But the average family is having trouble meeting its credit card debt, paying their kids' bills, having enough as prices go up, enough to pay for food on the table, and taking care of elderly relatives sometimes who need extra medications. So I would urge those in both chambers who are on these budget and tax writing committees to spend the time that's necessary and not burden the American people with unnecessary delay, and give the economy the boost that it needs by maintaining the middle class tax cuts on the payroll tax cut and making those at the top 1% end pay their fair share. Many, many years ago, they paid a lot more percentage-wise than they do today, and we had lots of job creation in this country. It simply eludes me why those at the very top end of the income scale who have taken most of the benefit of growth in the last 20 years, why they are so adverse when they're doing so well to helping our country and to making sure that everyone has a chance to prosper, because when everyone prospers, so does the top 1%. And that's where this consumer spending injection from the middle class tax cut, payroll tax cut, plays such a significant role in the economy. Now, I wanted to say a word also that as we buy for the holiday season, nothing could be more important than buying made in the USA goods. Why is that important? It's important because when you see that label, made in the USA, you know that those dollars flow back to that company and to those workers, and you actually help build wealth in this country. Last weekend, when we were doing some shopping for the holidays, we went in one store, and I kept looking at labels, and it was China, 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 and I'd put it back on the shelf. It was actually staggering what percentage of those goods, a majority of the goods on the shelves, were actually made someplace else. I made a point of going to a craft fair in our region and was able to buy several Christmas gifts that were handmade, and I felt really good about that because I knew that those people who had taken their artistic abilities and they had created tableware, table linens, other items that were jewelry that was handmade, I knew it would benefit those families and would go to work in the communities that they came from. And it shouldn't be so hard to find made in the USA goods on the shelves of our major retailers. So I would just urge our citizens, as you're doing your holiday shopping, and I know sometimes it's hard, to really try to look for that label, made in the USA, and to help your own community to find small businesses, to find products in your community that are made here, so that those dollars recirculate over and over and over again and help to build the real wealth of our nation that made America great. I'd urge you to look at candy makers in your region, at those who are making cookies, those who are small entrepreneurs of different kinds making scarves. I was able to go to one potter in our region and ordered several items for this holiday season. That's a local artist who has her own shop and makes her own goods right there, exports out of that shop, and I know that that's going to help our region grow. So we can do a lot in our own lives and in the way that we spend those precious dollars to really help job creation in our regions, in our country, at a time when we really need it. I see that some of our other colleagues have joined us here on the floor, and I want to welcome Congressman Paul Tonka of the great state of New York, who is such an outstanding and really relentless voice on job creation, economic recovery in our country, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Representative.